All right. So if you are watching this, it is because you missed the first lecture of Unit 7. Unit 7, we are going to cover the Industrial Revolution and imperialism, which is the movement in which European countries have industrialized, but now they need natural resources, so they take over other countries for those natural resources. But we'll get to that at the very end. Um, but as kind of an introduction to the Industrial Revolution and imperialism, we have to first talk about the Agricultural Revolution and why the Industrial Revolution starts in Britain. So we'll probably go up to slide 10 in this PowerPoint. Make sure you're taking good notes. And again, this is just, if you just write enclosure movement but don't discuss what it is, as I explain what it is, then your notes are going to be insufficient. So make sure you're writing more than what is just on the PowerPoint. But okay, let's talk about the agricultural revolution first. First let's just talk about the Industrial Revolution. That's what most of our unit is going to be about. The Industrial Revolution is the switch to machinery production, to mass produce things made by machines. It is going to turn the world into life as we know it. It's hard for you guys to imagine what life would be like if we didn't have the Industrial Revolution. If we didn't have the Industrial Revolution, everything we have would be made by hand stitched, hand threaded, mostly an agricultural society in which the main form of wealth was growing food and selling food. That's what life would be like without the Industrial Revolution. Just think about some of our small pieces of technology, like a clock. Before we had a clock run by batteries, right? Or even hand twisted, a hand turned clock, but it was, a mechanism that told time. The way people told time is they just looked at the sun in the sky, and life was slow moving, and they would notice time shifting with the seasons. And just think about everything that we have now that is machine produced. But before we get to the Industrial Revolution, we would not have the capital or the labor source to industrialize without first the Agricultural Revolution. So that's what we first need to talk about. All right, so the Agricultural Revolution started around 1650. And keep in mind, like when I discuss the Agricultural Revolution, it's happening over from like 1650 to like 1750, about 100 years. So this change in food production isn't going to happen overnight. But it starts around 1650, mostly because of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution that came before the Enlightenment. What we're going to see is we're going to see farmers. Most of these European countries are agricultural. They're going to start to apply the scientific method to agriculture. So write that down. They're going to start to apply reason to not just the political world, not just the natural world, which was the scientific revolution, but to agriculture. And I know you're wondering, I'm taking world history. Why am I learning about, farming history? Well, just hang with me, okay? We're going to see people apply reason and the scientific method. If you remember what the scientific method was, you have to have a question, and then you have to have an experiment, and a controlled experiment, a systematic way to find your answer, to see if something works. And mostly we're going to see people improve their farms on the wealthier side, because they're the ones that are going to be able to know how to read, and they're, the wealthier landowners are going to be the ones that are reading about the scientific journals of the day, and they're going to kickstart the Agricultural Revolution, because they're going to start to test out their farms and figure out ways to produce food more efficiently. Well, we're also going to see a big pressure for change to start the Agricultural Revolution is that of population growth. the population in these European countries is increasing significantly, and therefore they need to produce more food. Demand is rising, but the amount of land that they have is the same. They can't create more land. Well, you could have, but actually, some of these European countries are losing land because they're losing some of their colonies. But so, in order to produce more food, they're going to have to apply a lot of these scientific method ideas to their agriculture in a systematic way. If you recall, I'll come back to this. For a long time, there was crop rotation, in which if you have 3 fields, you would always have one field remain fallow, meaning you're not going to grow anything on that field. Because otherwise, if you're just constantly growing food year after year after year, what's going to happen? Eventually, you're going to deplete the soil of all of its nutrients, and the next harvest is just going to be like nothing, right? I know it says animals graze on this, unfarmed land. That's true to an extent, but they're not grazing in any systematic way. What we're actually going to see is we're going to see, give me a second, a lot of animals, because they're not going to have enough food by the winters, they're going to have to slaughter many of the animals before winter, which means they're not going to have a ton of cheese, a ton of butter, a ton of eggs, a ton of meat throughout the winter time. And so, anyways, what this crop rotation system means is that one field is always going to be wasted, unfarmed. And that's very inefficient. And so now with all this population growth, they're going to need to figure out ways to change and to increase their food production. And the first thing is they need to figure out how to make use of this land throughout the time. And also, another pressure for change is the right to private property, specifically in Britain, after the Glorious Revolution and its Bill of Rights, in which the government's supposed to protect your private property, according to John Locke, life, liberty, and property. You're going to see people realize that if they have the right to their private property, they're going to be more likely to improve what they have if they're allowed to keep most of their profits, if the government's not allowed to take it from them, if it's not shared with everyone else. And so countries that have and give the right to their citizens, the right to private property, you're going to see the revolution, the agricultural revolution, and the uptick in food production significantly more. When you get to keep your wealth, you're way more likely to improve it and to try to get more wealth. If for a long time, though, before the Glorious Revolution, before the Enlightenment, which brought about all these rights, such as the right to property, your peasants pretty much shared the land. It was called common land. There was no fences, and everyone just kind of harvested from their plot, but it wasn't theirs. And there's no way to really improve any farming techniques without this thing called enclosure. So the enclosure movement is literally it got rid of these common fields that had been around for hundreds of years. And what it's going to do is going to fence in land, right? That enclosure. So this is a perfect picture of an enclosure movement in which land you start to see to become divided. And the reason that this enclosure movement, all it takes is just a little bit of fencing to significantly change how you can make use of the land more efficiently. Now you can test the scientific method and figure out new techniques to increase food production in a systematic way. You couldn't do that before when it was all common land. And so this is going to enable people, the fencing in of land is going to enable farmers to systematically apply new techniques to the farmland to increase the food production. Let's see. All right, so We already got that down. New crop rotation. That's what I want you guys to write down. New crop rotation. New crops, really. I'm gonna write that in. So now, instead of leaving one field fallow, what we're going to start to see is in that third field that they normally wouldn't grow in, they're going to grow new crops, specifically things like turnips. Specifically crops that produce nitrogen within the soil. So clover, that's another crop that you can grow. It replenishes the soil. So now we're not going to have a ton of wasted fields. Now, at this time period, some of you might like turnips, some of you might not. At this time period, they didn't really believe like people should be eating turnips. So what they did though is they would feed the turnips to the animals. It would turn into animal feed throughout the winter. So you didn't have to slaughter as many animals. So you had a lot more meat and animal products like cheese, butter, eggs throughout the winter time. And so way more productive to bring in new crops like turnips, right? Turnips, as they replenish the soil. We're also, of course, going to see new inventions. So now the new inventions are more a result of people who are just really good at tinkering with little machines, not necessarily the scientific revolution. But one of the main things is the reaper. So beforehand, you would have, in order to harvest wheat, it was such a labor-intensive job. You would have this thing called a scythe, this big knife, and you would cut down a handful of wheat with the scythe, put it in the pocket. Cut down another handful of wheat, put it in the pocket. Now we're going to start to see the reaper. And the reaper, horse-drawn if you have horses, person-drawn if you don't. And it will harvest the wheat and put it in bales significantly faster, doing the work of like hundreds of men in a fraction of the time. We're also going to see the seed drill, this new invention. You either pull it along yourself or have an animal do it, like a donkey or a mule, and it makes sure that the seeds are all in one straight line, so you can systematically test out and more efficiently produce your food. You're also going to make sure the seed is deep enough, but not too deep for every single one, so each seed germinates rather than just doing it with your finger, which takes way more time and is an estimate. And so keep in mind that these are still either animal powered or human powered, but they will significantly improve the efficiency of producing food. The results of the agricultural revolution in England in the 1700s, we're going to see about 80% of the country and people working were agricultural workers, were farmers. But by 1870, so like 170 years later, 150 years later, we're going to see only 14% of the population working in agriculture, going from 80% to 14%, and yet we're still going to see a 300% increase in food production. So that is how much the enclosure movement, new crop rotations, the introduction of turnips, and these new inventions have really improved food production. Now what we're going to see is, England went from 80% of the country being an agricultural worker to 14%. We're going to see an increase in labor. People are going to go out of business. What we're going to see commercial farming. Commercial farming is, you might have all seen it before in the past, but nowadays our farming is very commercial. You see these huge tractors and these huge, I don't know what they're called, like all these huge machines that go into farming hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres of land on our farms in the United States. Some of these tractors, some of these pretty much like massive tractors that just hold all of the food. I mean, some of these pieces of equipment cost more than the farmer's house, right? And so we're going to see these smaller farmers, they're not going to be able to compete with these richer farmers. Specifically, it was the richer farmers that kind of had the head start in the agricultural revolution because they were educated enough to learn about the scientific method and to systematically test out their crops. The smaller farmers are going to try to hold on, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and how they try to hold on. But eventually, many of these workers are going to be forced to find more work not in the countryside. They're going to be forced to move to the cities, the smaller farmers that go out of business, that are put out of business from the bigger commercial farmers. There's just not enough job. You can work harder, but you're going to get less money out of it. You know, some of these small time farmers, they're going to become a sharecropper first before they move to the city. But eventually they're going to have to move to the city in search of work. And that's when we see the industrialization. That's when we see factory labor. And we're going to see an increase in machine production, right? Machine production. After the agricultural revolution, we have now more labor because of all these farmers who are out of work, who can't compete with these commercial farmers, and they need a job, so they move to the city. We're also going to see more wealth generated. When people have more wealth, which we'll talk a little bit about next time, they're going to be able to invest in new business ventures. And some of their money is going to be wasted, but some of it's going to make them even more and more and more money. And you can only really have this industrial revolution if there's an excess amount of wealth for people to invest and risk their money to make more money. If everyone's starving, no one's going to risk their money to try to make more money. You're just going to spend it to get by, if that makes sense. So if we don't have the agricultural revolution, we would not have the wealth or the labor source in order to see the industrial revolution even take place by around the 1750s. The industrial revolution will start in Britain. And the British people, they're going to claim at this time period that they are superior to the rest of the world because they were the first country to industrialize. They're going to have a huge head start. Granted, the rest of the countries are going to eventually catch up, but they're going to have a huge head start. But it's not because they're superior. It is because of several very important factors. So keep in mind, you know, the compass needed for for exploration came from China. The number system came from India. So it would be incorrect and it would be a fallacy to say that the British people, because they just so happened to industrialize first, they're superior, when really they only got to this point because of all these inventions that came from other societies. So let's not fall into that fallacy, and let's learn about a couple specific reasons why Britain industrialized first. So, in Britain in 1750, why Britain? Well, Britain did have a bit of wealth, and the people, according to the Bill of Rights in 1688, Britain has a history, especially after John Locke, like I mentioned before, of their ability to keep their wealth. And if you could keep your wealth, you're way more likely to improve it. Now, Britain had wealth, but so did China. China had wealth too. But in the Chinese economy, you did not have a right to property. You could only sell your property if your family wants to sell your property. And in France, if you keep France in mind, France won't guarantee the right to property until the Napoleonic Code, until the 1800s, until about over 50 years after Britain gives the right to property. And so, private property. And so Britain has its head start in giving the right to private property. So maybe write that down. Britain gives the right to private property. So people get to keep their wealth. And if they can keep their wealth, they're way more likely to improve their wealth, to improve their property, to make more wealth. Or sell it if they don't find it useful anymore, to make more wealth. Either one. But in other countries at this time, you didn't have the right to do that individually. Roads and canals. The only thing I'll say about roads and canals is you can see all of the canals that England has built. England's an island, and so 2 hours any direction, you have access to water, which is going to be an advantage for England to move big things of coal and production from the factories throughout the rest of England to the ports to sell it to other countries. Canals are a pretty big one, and also roads. The Enlightenment is going to highly affect how people, build their infrastructure within their society. They're going to build all-weather roads, so they can continue to travel even when it's pouring rain out. Before an all-weather road, you wouldn't be able to do that. It would be so mud slick, you wouldn't be able to move. Your wagon would get caught every single time. And so just increasing the amount of travel within the country is also significant, kind of a significant improvement in the country in order to have industrialization. And England definitely was able to do that with their canal system as well. Britain also had access to lots of markets. All a market is somewhere where you can sell your goods. Write that down. Somewhere where you can sell your goods. Britain had colonial markets, right? It had colonies for a very long time in which it was forcing the colonists to buy British goods. And it was forcing the colonists to sell their raw materials to Britain. But it also had internal markets. It had a lot of people were buying and selling things within the British economy. Connected by all these all-weather roads, connected the cities to all these all-weather roads. So it had very strong internal markets and colonial markets. Britain, this is a little bit of a unique situation. The British goods that they're making are going to be too much in demand. People want British goods, but there's not going to be enough of them because they're selling a lot of them in Britain and they're selling them abroad. They have a lot of markets. They couldn't make enough, specifically enough cotton cloth to sell to meet the demand, which is a little bit of an unusual situation. Their geography is also just happens to be luck. The British people are just lucky that their island has lots of coal and lots of iron. You need those two natural resources in order to industrialize. Now, the coal and iron deposits are going to be just naturally, luckily, fortunately for the British, close to their cities. It's an island, so really 2 hours any direction, it's close to one of their cities. But, that's different than in China. China, the coal and iron, they're plentiful around the world. But the Chinese coal and iron deposits just happen to be concentrated up near like the mountain ranges, not near their cities. And so you're going to need coal and iron to industrialize and eventually power cities and the factories within the cities. And so Britons just happen to be much closer to their cities already. So they're going to be the first to industrialize for that reason. We'll talk a little bit more about the steam engine later. Where was I? So this is a perfect moment to kind of pause. This is kind of the end of the lecture video. But for resources, did you just write the word resources? Did you write coal and iron? Did you write located close to cities, industrial centers? Those are all things that we need to kind of make sure we're adding to our notes as if we have to watch a lecture video if we're not in class. Also, another great option is to just take a picture of other people's notes, record them in your notebook, and then watch the lecture video and add anything that you don't already have down to make sure you get everything. Because in class, I'm emphasizing certain words, I'm writing things down on the board, and you have to work extra hard to make sure you get everything if you're watching it in a lecture video. Or at least show me your notes when you return so I can make sure that you have everything. Okay, so we just talked about the agricultural revolution and why Britain. The Industrial Revolution will start in Britain first, and Britain will have a huge head start. And next class, we'll talk about the actual Industrial Revolution. All right, so let me know if you need anything, and thank you for watching.